kidding me? That was my freshly poured Yirgachev coffee. You just knocked it over again.
Well, physically speaking, I mean, this is just a sudden, unplanned intersection of momentum conservation between my elbow and a ceramic mug in three-dimensional space. And, plus, you have to admit I am rigorously field testing the water-resistant limits of this studio rug.
Sip&Talkers, I really need you to be the judge here. This is literally the third time this week. I'm officially announcing the formation of an anti-clumsy behavior unity coalition among our listeners. We are going to unify, we are going to mandate absolute compliance, and you're going to be legally forced to drink your coffee out of a leak-proof toddler sippy cup.
Haha. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Whatever time zone you are in, welcome back to Sip&Talk. I'm Joe.
I'm Sunny. But, phrasing it exactly like that, using heavy-handed mandates to enforce unity across a population, well, that perfectly kicks open the door to what we really need to unpack today. Because our inbox has been totally overflowing all week.
Oh, yeah, completely bricked with messages.
Right. Listeners have been asking about the exact same geopolitical development, and it ties right into that concept of mandated unity.
Because on July 1st, 2026, Beijing is officially rolling out the Ethnic Unity in Progress Promotion Law. And on the surface, the naming convention sounds like a global utopia.
Oh, absolutely.
It sounds remarkably similar to a DEI initiative you would see at a Silicon Valley tech company. It highlights cross-cultural marriage and shared prosperity. But when you look at the actual legal framework, we are seeing the architecture for a massive global long-arm jurisdiction.
Yeah, and to set the baseline for this conversation today, our objective is to look strictly at the mechanics of this legislation, right?
Yeah.
And the international data surrounding it. We are not here to endorse political viewpoints or take partisan sides. We are simply mapping out how these legal texts function and how they interact with our international borders.
Right, exactly. When we read the actual playbook, I think the historical pivot is what stands out first. For decades, the early framework over there was loosely modeled on a Soviet-style ethnic autonomy.
Basically meaning different regions technically maintain some level of distinct cultural identity or language.
Right, but this new law formally dismantles that. It is a legally binding mandate for single-nation assimilation.
Yeah, and the domestic enforcement mechanisms are where you see the shift from theory to reality. Like, the law mandates the use of standard Mandarin in preschools, but it also legally enforces the, quote, transformation of backward customs.
Wait, backward customs, that is so vague.
It is incredibly vague. And that specific phrasing is critical because it lacks a rigid legal definition. By keeping the term backward ambiguous, it delegates enormous discretionary power to local officials.
So they could basically do whatever they want.
Pretty much. They essentially have a blank check to criminalize entirely peaceful religious rituals or traditional dress or local habits if they deem them detrimental to this mandated unity.
Okay, if we think about it, it feels exactly like a hostile corporate takeover.
Oh, that is a great way to put it.
Right. It's like the new boss comes in, forces everyone to wear identical uniforms, completely bans the old team's language, and then just slaps a label on it called corporate unity.
Yeah, corporate unity, but you have no choice.
Exactly. But that level of vagueness seems structurally designed to give local enforcement unlimited discretion. And if they are policing local habits, they are inevitably policing the home, right? We are seeing clauses where parents are legally obligated to teach state-approved history to their children.
Yeah, the state is effectively entering the living room. If a parent shares a personal ethnic grievance or, an unapproved historical narrative with their own child, they are violating the law.
Wow.
It turns schools and even neighbors into a potential surveillance network. Like, if a child repeats an unapproved story in a classroom setting, the parents can actually be held legally responsible for failing their statutory duty to promote unity.
That is wild. But if a government is going to those lengths to control the narrative inside their own physical borders, they obviously need a mechanism to control the narrative outside of them. Which brings us to the core issue for our international listeners.
Right, Article 63.
Exactly. This section explicitly states that any individual or organization outside the country that destroys ethnic unity can be held legally responsible.
And the inclusion of individuals outside the country is what transforms this from just a domestic policy into a tool for global deterrence.
So let me clarify how that works mechanically, just for our listeners. If we sit right here in our California studio, operating as American citizens, and we support Taiwan's identity on this show, or we critique human rights policies in Tibet, does the letter of this new law classify us as criminals?
According to the legal text, yes.
Wow.
Which raises the obvious question, right? Why pass a law you lack the physical jurisdiction to enforce in California?
Right. They can't just send local police to Los Angeles.
Exactly. The objective isn't necessarily to send police to LA. The objective is to engineer a global chilling effect. You do not need to step foot in their territory to feel the impact.
So how does it actually hit you then?
Well, a simple social media post could result in your arrest if you ever transit through Hong Kong or Macau. It can trigger the freezing of overseas assets. But most effectively, it serves as a legal justification to retaliate against any relatives you might still have inside their borders.
Oh, man. So the threat itself is the enforcement mechanism. It forces academics, journalists, and everyday citizens into self-censorship just to protect their families or their travel capabilities. But Article 63 isn't operating in a vacuum, is it? Because if they are locking down physical borders and punishing people who never even step foot in the country, this has to be part of a larger systemic matrix.
Oh, it is entirely systemic. Think of this new unity law as the latest component in what geopolitical analysts call the 3 arrows of cross-border lawfare.
Okay, 3 arrows. Break that down for us.
So these are 3 distinct legal frameworks designed to work in tandem to combat our tech regulations and our diplomatic policies.
Let's see how those arrows interact then.
Yeah.
The first one seems focused on the physical point of entry, right? The newly expanded anti-espionage law from 2023 and 2024.
Yeah, that is arrow number 1. They expanded the definition of espionage so broadly that it now covers standard corporate data exchanges. It legally empowers border agents to arbitrarily inspect the phones and laptops of visiting executives or scholars.
Okay, so that first arrow ensures that your digital privacy basically ceases to exist the exact moment you hit customs.
Right, exactly.
But as you pointed out earlier, they need a way to target people who just refuse to travel there. So what is the second arrow?
That is the Hong Kong National Security Law, specifically when you combine it with the new Article 23. This creates a formalized structure for cross-border proxy coercion.
To put a real-world face on that proxy coercion, I think we should look at the February 2026 case involving Anna Kwok.
Yeah. That is a perfect example.
She is a prominent activist based right here in the U.S., and because they could not reach her physically in Washington, her father was convicted in Hong Kong.
Right.
The court system was utilized strictly to punish a family member as retaliation for her protected speech inside the United States.
It functions as a state-sanctioned hostage mechanism. It really does. And then you have the third arrow, which is the anti-foreign long-arm jurisdiction rules, which they launched in April 2026.
Okay, so who does that one target?
This arrow targets corporate entities rather than individuals. It is a direct legal retaliation against Western sanctions, like our GPS Act. So if a foreign multinational company or NGO complies with U.S. or EU tech restrictions, for example, halting advanced semiconductor sales, this law allows Beijing to place them on a malicious entity list.
Wow, that puts global businesses in an impossible position.
Oh, absolutely.
They are forced to choose between complying with our international laws and maintaining their access to a massive consumer market. But, writing these sprawling legal texts is one thing. Actually executing them internationally requires physical logistics. How does a foreign government actually project this kind of enforcement into a city like New York or London?
Yeah, that is the terrifying part, because they absolutely do. The execution of these laws is tracked really closely by organizations like Freedom House. And their June 2026 data on transnational repression details exactly how the legal text translates into physical and digital harassment.
What does that look like on the ground?
Well, the most visible tactic has been the deployment of illegal overseas police stations.
Right. And they mask these operations behind innocuous-sounding organizations, like hometown associations or cultural centers embedded in major diaspora communities.
Precisely. They utilize these centers to monitor local diaspora populations and coerce dissidents into returning home.
That is just wild.
But the physical footprint is really only a fraction of the operation. We are seeing massive, highly coordinated campaigns of AI-driven digital harassment.
Like what kind of campaigns?
They deploy deepfakes and automated bot networks, specifically targeting female scholars and journalists who critique policies regarding Taiwan or Xinjiang. They attempt to ruin reputations and essentially drive them out of the public square.
We have also seen sophisticated cyber campaigns aimed at the international legal community, right? The international lawyers defending Jimmy Lai, the pro-democracy publisher in Hong Kong, have faced relentless phishing attacks.
Yeah, it is an active attempt to breach cross-border attorney-client privilege,
which is just a cornerstone of our legal system. And alongside the cyber attacks, there is the manipulation of international institutions. Most notably, the abuse of Interpol red notices.
Right. By disguising political dissidents as economic criminals wanted for fraud or embezzlement, they weaponize the international police network to execute their domestic political warrants.
So we're looking at a highly integrated blend of legal threats, physical intimidation, and digital warfare. And currently, this entire apparatus seems laser-focused on Taiwan.
Oh, absolutely focused on Taiwan.
Right. Because if a kinetic war is off the table just because of the economic devastation it would cause, they have to rely on an information war to break the island's resolve from the inside out.
Taiwan is definitely the primary focal point for these tactics right now. The objective is internal collapse before any military action is ever needed. And the most potent weapon in that information war is the manipulation of international narratives.
We saw a perfect example of that narrative manipulation recently regarding our own upcoming elections here.
Yeah, we did.
There was a massive wave of regional editorials pushing the idea that American support is crumbling. And they intentionally mistranslated statements from Trump to build that narrative.
The mechanics of that mistranslation were very, very deliberate. Editorials widely claimed that Trump agreed to fight Taiwan independence. But the actual English transcript shows he stated he wasn't looking for someone to go independent.
And the distinction between those two phrases is massive.
Huge.
Saying you aren't looking to encourage unilateral changes to the status quo is standard diplomatic policy. But translating that into fighting independence implies active military suppression alongside Beijing.
Right, and they utilize that manufactured translation to tell the Taiwanese public that the U.S. is actively against them, attempting to foster deep U.S. skepticism.
Just trying to make them feel isolated.
Exactly, because if they can convince the population that resistance is futile and no international help is coming, they hope the island will essentially surrender from within. And this is also why we are seeing such aggressive weaponization of polling data.
The polling data manipulation is fascinating because it relies on asking questions in a total vacuum. We saw editorials heavily promoting a poll claiming that 60% of Taiwanese people want peace talks.
Right, and 60% sounds like an overwhelming mandate.
It really does. But when you look at the crosstabs and see how the numbers shift when the actual cost of those peace talks is explained, the initial headline completely falls apart.
The cratering of those numbers is what reveals the true public sentiment. So if a pollster asks, do you support peace talks, if it means accepting the one country, two systems model, support immediately drops from 60% to 22.4%.
And it continues to plummet based on the geopolitical realities. Like, if the poll asks if they support talks if it means losing the Republic of China as a sovereign entity, support drops to 9.1%.
Wow.
And if it means losing freedom and democracy, it hits a rock-bottom 5.9%. It reminds me of a predatory timeshare pitch.
Oh, a timeshare pitch. How so?
Well, think about it. You get a call asking, do you want a free vacation? Of course, everyone says yes.
Right, obviously.
But then they ask, do you want a free vacation if it means living in a cage? Suddenly, nobody's buying.
That is a perfect analogy. And that data demonstrates why the initial peace question is deliberately asked without context. They manufacture a 60% headline for international consumption just to legitimize their narrative.
But the timeline for this pressure campaign is accelerating, isn't it?
Yeah, because Xi is facing a critical window leading up to an unspoken 2027 third-term deadline. Plus, domestically, they are navigating severe youth unemployment and a highly volatile real estate sector.
Right.
Consolidating power and securing that unprecedented third term was heavily predicated on resolving the Taiwan issue.
Which really brings us to the ultimate geopolitical irony of this entire strategy.
Yeah.
They're passing heavy-handed laws like the Ethnic Unity Act and Article 63, and they are utilizing the rhetoric of global harmony. Yet, by aggressively attempting to mandate submission, they have achieved the exact opposite of their intended goal. They have created real unity, but it is unity directed squarely against them.
It is a profoundly self-defeating strategy, because by proving that their legal overreach does not respect international borders, they have inadvertently built an unprecedented global defense network.
Right. We are seeing alignments that were previously unthinkable. You have the G7, the Interparliamentary Alliance on China, and fiercely competitive Silicon Valley tech giants, all suddenly moving in lockstep.
Yeah, democracies that frequently argue over trade tariffs and domestic policies are now completely aligned when it comes to defending their digital and physical sovereignty against these sprawling long-arm laws.
It is incredible to watch.
Taking a step back, though, navigating this volume of information, From domestic cultural policies to Article 63's global reach to the proxy coercion of family members, it can feel incredibly heavy. It really highlights a complex and often frustrating shift in global dynamics.
Oh, it definitely can. I mean, it is a lot to take in. But the reason we dive into these cold laws, these geopolitical realities, and these polling mechanics here on Sip&Talk is not to spread panic. We aren't here to blindly bash another regime. The true objective is to cultivate independent thinking.
Exactly. When you understand the actual mechanics of how these laws function and how information is deliberately manipulated for international consumption, you gain the ability to analyze the geopolitical board clearly.
You stop being swayed by empty buzzwords like unity or progress.
Right. Seeing the reality of this situation allows all of us to view the world with absolute clarity. And maintaining that clear-headed perspective is our most effective defense in an era defined by information warfare.
I completely agree.
Before we sign off today, I do want to leave you with one final provocative question to consider. As authoritarian regimes continue to build these expansive legal frameworks to punish overseas speech, what happens when our own open, interconnected internet becomes the very tool they use to enforce their closed borders?
Wow, that is a really complex dynamic to untangle. Does our connectivity ultimately become our vulnerability? We want to hear your thoughts on this global chilling effect. Send us your insights on how AI ecosystems play into this lawfare. Or honestly, just send us your recommendations for a foolproof, spill-proof sippy cup for our studio.
Hey, I am fully prepared to review any and all cup recommendations. And while you are doing that, please don't forget to subscribe to Sip and Talk wherever you get your audio. We also want to give a massive shout out to our old friend Mickey's YouTube channel, Mickey to Life.
Yes. You have to go watch his latest travel vlog. It is incredibly fun, totally stress-free, and honestly the perfect palate cleanser after unpacking a heavy topic like today's.
Highly recommend.
Thank you so much for joining us in the studio today, everyone. Keep thinking critically, keep your coffee in a secure container, and we will see you next time. Bye.
Thanks, everyone. See you next time.